Okay, we're going to get started. So I am Dr. Julie Johnson. I am the Director of Continuing and Professional Studies here at Rutgers University School of Communication and Information. We are delighted that you would join us today. And I have with me three great public relations and public affairs gurus. We have Mike Sharonson, who is also the academic director here at CPS for our communications program. We have Mike Daly, who is a retired military colonel, PR person, who's also teaching here at CPS in our public relations certificate, our measurements course. And then we have Mark McGrath, the very famous podcaster, guru, captain of the Marines. And I am going to just welcome all of you today to a great conversation. And I'm going to turn things over to Mike Sharonson.
Well, thanks, Julie. And as noted, I'm Mike Sharonson, and it's an honor to welcome you all to our colloquium, The Hidden Advantage of Strategic Communications, Adaptation, Perception, and Influence. And in the era of uncertainty, where volatility can disrupt industries overnight, strategic communicators face a defining challenge. How do we navigate complexity while ensuring our messages remain impactful and resilient? Today's program will explore how we turn uncertainty into an advantage, leverage agility, perception, and influence to shape narratives, build credibility, and drive meaningful engagement. This colloquium is part of Rutgers Continuing and Professional Studies, an innovative initiative dedicated to equipping industry professionals with the knowledge and tools to excel in the evolving communication landscape. Through flexible, career-focused certificate programs and expert-led instruction, CPS helps communicators stay ahead of the trend, refine their strategies, and apply practical skills in real-world scenarios. Our goal is to bridge academic insights with professional applications, ensuring that attendees walk away with actionable takeaways. And I think Scott's going to put a link to our programs in the Q&A or chat, so please check that out. Registration is on now, so please, we encourage everyone to register ASAP. Today, our expert speakers will offer critical insights into the rapidly shifting information environment. First, Mike Daly, co-founder and CEO of Communication Metrics, will examine the challenges posed by media fragmentation, information overload, and declining public trust. With over 28 years of experience in brand strategy, stakeholder engagement, and communication measurement, he'll demonstrate how volatility, rather than being a threat, can be a tool for capturing attention and shaping perception in real time. Then, Mark McGrath, Chief Learning Officer at AGLX, and like Mike Daly, a former U.S. Marine officer, will introduce powerful strategic framework for dealing with complexity. With a background in asset management, military leadership, and strategy consulting, he'll show us how speed, adaptability, and strategic positioning can help communicators gain an edge in high-stakes environments. We're honored to have such a fantastic lineup of speakers today. I encourage you to engage, ask questions, and please use the Q&A, and we'll get to that at the end. Again, please use the Q&A and take full advantage of their insights. As a bonus, all attendees will be entered into a random drawing for a free CPS course. So stay tuned for that at the end. We're going to have the Wheel of Fortune, and we're going to actually pick a winner at today's session. So with that, let's get started. So please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Mike Daly.
Hello, everybody. Really glad to be here today. I'm working on my slide share right now, and see if I get that up for you folks. There we go. What I'm not able to do right now just yet, technical team, is I'm having trouble advancing these slides. So there we go. Magic of technology, everybody, which we'll talk about today. And I'm glad to be joining my partner Mark here in this discussion with everybody for the next hour or so. We've broken this into a couple of parts. One is that we are going to be talking about the volatile strategic communication environment. That's generally what I'm going to cover. And then Mark's going to give you some really fantastic ways of looking at this in your decision-making process. So with no further ado, we're going to begin by understanding the volatility in the strategic communication world. And with that, the way I'd like to do this is by way of case studies, and then give you the important points with each of these. Again, to give you a good foundation as we proceed towards Mark's part of the discussion, and then hopefully your questions, give you a good orientation on the environment we work in, some basic understandings of what works and doesn't work, and then continue with some advanced tools. So I'd like to start with the nature of the environment. The nature of the environment is it's characterized by these points. It's rapidly changing mediascapes, information overload and audience fragmentation, an erosion of trust in traditional sources, and misinformation and disinformation, crisis sensitivity, and what really can arguably call strategic communication warfare, where there's a push and a pull amongst competing interests in the strategic communication environment. And this is not just demilitarizing this for a minute. This is not just a military concern. This is a competitive world concern. And we'll see some more examples of that as we proceed and dig into these a little bit deeper. I want to first look at the opportunity that exists in chaos. What you're looking at here is Elon Musk's Starship, one of its early iterations there that was quite spectacularly exploded. What was interesting about this, and talking about the opportunity in chaos, is that SpaceX had a lot of these explosions occur. But each time they did, instead of downplaying the situation, they decided to capitalize on it. They turned a minus into a plus, live streaming their test flights, admitting to the failures, and that was part of their learning process, and literally creating and turning setbacks into positive moves forwards. So their framing took advantage of the chaos. Instead of losing the public trust, they gained admiration for transparency and resilience. And as one who works in the space industry, I would tell you that it really, really built credibility. So it was quite phenomenal to watch how they turned chaos on its end. Out of these, the important points to take away from this are that volatility definitely breeds attention and urgency. But crisis should be looked at as an opportunity for influence. And also, there's got to be a psychological understanding of its impact of persuasion in uncertain times. Now, understanding that it's an environment that we should not fear but look to exploit, not retreat but go forward, there's strategies to exploit this information influence. Again, using a test case or an example, Airbnb, back in about, the time frame would have been around the COVID time frame when it first hit. Well, obviously, Airbnb is in the transportation business, and travel literally came to a halt. Airbnb looked at this, and they literally lost about 25% of their business. So what they decided to do was approach through their key messaging and tactics, turn this again on its ear, and put out a message where they were accommodating the folks that were going to be in these new circumstances to maintain their relevance during this time. A lot of their work was focused on community storytelling. And through this, Airbnb literally was able to reinforce their core brand identity. So it was quite an amazing thing. Again, another great case of saying, okay, we're faced with this situation. How do we capitalize on it? How do we not take a step backwards and just muster our forces around us and close ranks? The final takeaway that Airbnb had, and if you read the example, the case studies, is that that chaos, during a time of chaos, messaging can thrive if it's empathetic and transparent and adaptable and aligned with a company's core values. These would be the notes that I would want all of my fellow communicators out there to take away. Study agile messaging. It is not just crisis response, but it's very specifically response and proactivity. So it's a little bit different than a lot of us are used to. Also, you're in a scenario of ambiguity. So you use controlled ambiguity very strategically, where you find the ambiguity, the ambiguous soft spots, and those are the places you lean into. And then timing and urgency in communication. Now, we all deal with this. And those of us that have worked around bureaucratic agencies or government agencies know that sometimes timing and urgency are lost on leadership. But this is very critical, and we'll give you some ideas of how to work through this, so stay tuned. But again, it's nothing you can take very lightly, because as Airbnb explained and showed, that they were on top of this immediately with their social media outreach, talking to their contract drivers. It was an incredible response time to get on top of this once they read the tea leaves of what was going on. Next, I want to talk a little bit about framing the narrative for maximum penetration. And for that, I'd like to use Apple's Think Different example. In this particular case, Apple had they had come to a point in their time where they knew that they were not going in the direction they needed to. They started out as an equipment tech kind of a company, and then they had in the 80s, of course, they had the very famous commercial where they had started their process to say, no, we need folks to think of us in an entirely different format. So, in a different way going forward. We don't want to just be an equipment company. We want to be a new, trend-setting, innovative company that creates that kind of mindset amongst our customers and our followers. So they created the Apple Think Different program. What did it show us, and what came out of this program in particular? First of all, they used framing techniques that actually approached two directions. They framed gains, and they've studied and they learned how to frame losses, so that they were, and it was, by the way, it's not just losses or gains on their part. This was also through competitive analysis. They were studying the framing techniques of their competition on how they framed gain and loss versus loss, and if they were not paying attention to it at all. So, which is a very key point in strategic planning, is what is your competitor forgetting? Or what is your competitor literally not doing? What is that weak point? They also learned from their Think Different campaign about emotional versus logical appeal and those volatile settings. Apple grew out of a very logical kind of an environment. Quite candidly, what Steve Jobs knew both the times he was there is that, and learned more after he got done building the iPod and bringing in the streaming music, is that there's very much an emotional quotient here. So in framing the narrative, the techniques you use, understanding whether it's calling for an emotional or logical appeal in those volatile settings. Are people bailing because it's volatile? Is there a logical reason, something you've forgotten? It's very, very interesting that you would need to focus on that issue, on that kind of paradigm. And then we all know this on this call, this discussion, the role of storytelling and persuasion. But I would tell everybody that in the case of a volatile setting, that it takes on an extra emphasis, because people are extremely, in volatile settings, emotions are very key to this. Logic really, in early stages at least, goes out the window. So storytelling and persuasion at that case is very much based on your understanding of the emotions of the target audience that you're talking to. In this section, I want to cover how you execute and the practical implementation. Again, reviewing where we've been. We looked at the environment. We understand there's certain approaches to the narrative. So we understand this theoretically and in discussions, but how do you actually do this? Now, I'm going to just give you an overview of this. Mark will get into this in more detail. But for the moment, let's just get the 30,000-foot level here and talk about execution and practical implementation. In this case, I'd like to talk about the Oreo cookie scenario. Now, for those of you who may not remember this or perhaps too young or weren't watching it, for the Super Bowl, this was during 2013. They lost power during the Super Bowl for about 34 minutes. And a lot of people were scrambling because those vendors, those marketers and advertisers said, oh my gosh, we have no way to translate our message out of this traditional system we've been using of marketing ads at halftime or wherever they break in. But we are now without power. Oreo was brilliant in this. They created what's now become known, you can still dunk in the dark campaign. And for those of you that haven't had an opportunity to study this particular case, it's fascinating. In a very, very, very short time, their social media teams were able to get out a very brief text, which got the content of it here. It was produced in dim lighting, and I was trying to see if I actually had the words, but during the blackout, it was a simple yet brilliant message. Power out, question, no problem. You can still dunk in the dark. Absolutely brilliant. What's amazing is here you've got a volatile situation. People are really emotional, no power. They have their social media team put out a very quick message to all aspects of people listening to them, tied into them, everybody. It was a global blitz, which was picked up immediately. It was tweeted, so it was out there for as much audience as they could find. And it really garnished a lot of attention. Now, what's the takeaway from this? Great response time. All of us would be giving them kudos in a crisis, but how can we understand this in terms of the volatile environment? Okay, here were things they developed out of this. First of all, they had a very well-developed crisis response team. And what was learned out of that, and they've since done, by the way, in their own example, is it's very important to develop and now gamify playbooks for crisis and opportunity. When many of us came along, it was just develop a playbook, put it on a shelf, break glass in case of problem. But now, as time's gone on and tools have gotten much better, and now we've got the opportunity of automated people to play against also, they have literally taken the playbooks and gamified them. What ifs? And it's been an incredible, incredible training exercise for their participants. They also established and have established real-time audience feedback loops. So by using Twitter, they were getting an immediate read on how the audience was accepting the message and what they were doing. And it was filled with humor, recognition for such a great job. You're on top of it. They took an incredible increase in as far as their message, retweets, 10,000 retweets on that message. Brand picked up good recognition. Sales did go up. So it was a very, very successful situation. And then adapt brand community narratives dynamically. This is key because in terms of brand communities, which that's a whole nother topic of discussion, that you've got to be connecting narratives to them as they happen, on the spot. Oreo has a brand community, very faithful. They had a narrative, they were able to connect dynamically, and they had a tremendous reward for it. So I'll go quickly about tools and techniques with monitoring and responsibility on this. I can't emphasize enough the importance of the tools and techniques that are used to support something like this. Colonel Sanders is my case here. Now, for those of you that don't remember what happened in 2018, Colonel Sanders had a major supply chain breakdown. There were a lot of them, but they literally found themselves without chicken. And this was a critical thing for people that sell chicken, obviously. So they looked at this and said, what can we do to satisfy our customers and say, we understand your fear, we feel your pain, and we're on it. Well, Colonel Sanders did a very successful twist here, and that was they decided to make it humorous and also apologize. Now, another thing that I've really not said a lot about yet is that what you're really going for throughout the volatile environment is to maintain trust. So it's very important to use, not just apologize if it's appropriate and accept whatever responsibility you might have in this, but also humor is used very, very well in these kinds of environments. So in the case of Colonel Sanders, they produced a bucket, and as you can see, they redid their logo wording, rearranged it, and because of this, basically said, this is a mea culpa, we messed up, and the audience was delighted. I mean, they thought this was fantastic, but it also really increased the trust with their target audience and built a lot of street credibility. So the points I'd like you to consider taking away from this instance, and the reason I'm giving you these cases is I sincerely hope that perhaps if you find them, come across them, I'm happy to send them to you on these. They're really good studies, and they do literally back up the points that Mark and I are trying to make here today through the colloquium. But let's look at the takeaway points that I'd like you to be aware of. Digital sentiment analysis tools, social listening, rapid response, and AI-driven predictive models, those are the tools that you're going to need for the volatile environment. Volatility is not going anywhere. I had one particular street fire fight there with citizens that were not happy, kind of a scenario. But every day we know we face these. We face these situations faster. And in order to stay up with fast, that being inside the information discussion, the information flow, we can't use a lot of the systems we used before, or we're going to have to use the new versions of them. Digital sentiment analysis tools must be from my perspective, but should be a critical part of your marketing effort. And I say this even to the government folks too that are on the line. Marketing effort, outreach effort, you've got to stay aware. In the lingo of the government, this is your intelligence gathering and sensing what your audiences are talking about, your stakeholders. Social listening and rapid response. Now, we know that you're doing better jobs at social listening, but it's very important to have these rapid response teams, as we indicated earlier, ready to go, up and trained and on it. Again, going back to the example of the last three examples, actually, that was one of the keys to their successes was, for the most part, they had rapid response teams. And then finally, AI predictive modeling, again, another course unto itself, probably. But I would just suggest to you that wherever we can bring them in, do not be afraid of AI. Learn prompt engineering. If you have nothing else going in 2025, put your teams into learning scenarios for your particular specialties and get them to understand predictive modeling and how best to use AI. Finally, in my part, I'd like to do two things. I'd like to give you a final case study, and this case study is interesting from a very fascinating standpoint. It's the BP oil spill, British Petroleum oil spill, that occurred some years back, and was 2010, I think it was. I got the note here on when it occurred specifically, but this is a very interesting case study. It is, yes, 2010. I want to confirm that for everybody. But 2010, British Petroleum, as those of you that remember, had a major oil spill in the Gulf. And you say, well, okay, knew that. But what some of you may not know is that it was probably one of the most poorly mishandled public relations cases, to the point that it's still studied around universities. And the idea being that they really, really started out wrong on it, didn't really do a good job throughout it, but it had a fascinating side point. And this is where I want to talk to you about volatility and exploitation. So let's consider this. What worked, what didn't, and why? Okay, British Petroleum, first of all, what didn't work was that they did a very bad job of going out there, rebuilding trust, and the responsibility, even though it was hard to not claim it because it was their platform, their particular chairman at the time said, basically he was giving messages out that were getting out in the public like, I'd like my life back. He was very famous for that. By the way, he's no longer with Petrol BP. He was replaced not too long after this incident. But the point is, I want my life back. But that went around the world because it communicated British Petroleum doesn't care. Now, what's interesting about this case and why I want to finish with this particular case is the competitors to British Petroleum did a phenomenal job of taking advantage of their problem. They said, okay, we've got a situation here where British Petroleum doesn't know how to handle this. And how can we take advantage of this? So what they did is they did some really interesting judo moves. People like their primary competitors, Chevron, Mobil, took advantage of this and said, we are the safe companies. Literally, that was the image that they were pushing through, and it was resonating. Then take another group, the environmental groups pounced on this. And what they did, and what's fascinating here, is that they took all of the talking points and they literally turned them on in, which is why I've shared with you the judo throw here. As a martial artist, I can tell you that a lot of it is about using a competitor's disadvantage to your advantage. And so they literally were doing that to British Petroleum. They took the exploitation, they took the volatile environment for British Petroleum, and they turned it on its ears and capitalized on it. And depending on the stakeholder group, like I said, the petroleum companies said we're safer, they're competitors. The environmental companies say, see, we need to go to more alternative means of energy. This is just a reason to speed it up. Now, key takeaways. Vaca there was at the beginning of our presentation here, and I just want to let you know that there's kind of like a little shorthand thing. And this is, I can't claim credit for this. This is vectories.com, but I love this because what it does is it takes the VUCA acronym and it says how you should think of it to your right there. Vision, understanding, clarify, and agility. That is what's going to help you here. Key takeaways that I would like you to have from this portion of my presentation and our discussion are these. I want you all to walk away embracing volatility rather than fear it. I want you to recommend that you learn and practice how to frame and control narratives strategically. So it's relating back to the gamification. If you're able to have a competitive component to the game, whether AI or another team, use it. Let them change control their narratives and counter the framing where you have to, because it is a very, very volatile changing thing. But now we've got tools to prepare for it. Use data-driven insights to inform messaging. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of data and getting inside the information digestion loop, which again, Mark's going to talk more on. And rather than being reaction, be more action-oriented. Finally, it's very important, as I've tried to show through the various cases, that it's extremely important to personalize these stories wherever you can and humanize those persuasion efforts. Think about the cases where we did this. Colonel Sanders said, I'm sorry. Oriel personalized and said, you can still have a cookie even in the dark. So Airbnb, being community oriented especially, said, we feel you. Here's what we're going to do to change your life and help you through this tough time of COVID as we're kind of learning the new normal. That's all of my portion. I'm going to turn it over to my partner now, Mark. And I just want you to know how much I've enjoyed getting a chance to throw out the first part of this. And I think you're going to find his aspect of this extremely interesting. So I'll be back a little bit later with all of you with the Q&A. Mark, it's all yours, buddy.
All right. Before Mark jumps in, I just want to know, Mike, thank you very much. This was great, and I appreciate it. It was awesome lead-in and defining the information environment, some great case studies. Just some housekeeping while Mark prepares his slides. Mark, if you want to put your stuff up while I'm talking, that's fine. Put the questions in the Q&A. There's one question now, Mark, you just may want to take note. Somebody asked, not only in the PR situations, but maybe when you give examples, how this could be some of this stuff used in the workplace, sports, it goes beyond public relations and how a lot of these things could be adaptable, if you will. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mark.
Thanks, Mike. To that point that you just made, everything that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to try to distill about 72 hours worth of briefings that I give over time periods to about 10, 15 minutes or so. I'd like to leave plenty of time for Q&A. I'd also like to emphasize what Mike just said. Everything that I talk about is going to apply and be applicable where humans are present that are capable of making sense of their environment, formulating decisions, acting on that, and learning. So the answer that I get, people will say, well, that means this is applicable everywhere. And the answer is yes, it is. When I first learned this stuff, beginning in 1994, when I started my formal training as a Naval ROTC midshipman, is where I first came into contact with a lot of the theory that I'm going to talk about. And it was by a guy called John Boyd that we'll get into. And the theory that he's most known for is the OODA Loop. I'm going to show you why that's only a very small understanding of what Boyd talked about, and I'm going to show you, hopefully, that with the full depth of what he was actually getting at, you're going to see that OODA Loop is actually a really small part, and there's a lot more. And the work that I do with clients across many industries is to show them that inherently, if they are successful, they're inherently doing all these things anyway. And when they create more awareness and understanding about how it actually all works, then they're able to get much better at it, and they become more competitive, collaborative, cohesive, cooperative, coordinative, etc. I'm not aware of many other industries better than the information war than for these theories to be applied, other than combat, other than maybe capital markets. This is one of the best areas, and this is a massive edge that is not often taught in business schools and other places, so or comm schools. So this is hopefully going to pique some interest. And if you have questions, I'm looking forward to those. Of course, you can follow me on my my Substack and our podcast, so we can talk about where those are later. So, we're living in an era right now where stability is out the door. Narrative shift really quick, overnight, within minutes. Media cycles turn into instant perception. It can be reshaped, recrafted almost instantaneously, because everybody's a participant. Everybody, unlike old days where we had 3 channels and a few major newspapers, now we have everybody as a participant through the electronic devices that they have. So we want to be thinking of that in this new environment that we're in, and it's not really new. It's evolving and unfolding, and we have to be realistic about it, and we've got to start mastering how we adapt within it. It's not about messages anymore to try to reach a single audience. It's about navigating where we're at. Media platforms now are fragmenting our attention span. We can get information, we can participate ourselves, and it's happening across a lot of different platforms. Again, the sort of the traditional way of doing things is is long gone. And one of the things that we've become subject to now is information overload, which is also shaping our perceptions. So the boundaries of a lot of sources are getting extremely blurred. More importantly, the influence, who has the actual influence in this information war, is extremely blurry. There's three key realities that I see in this landscape, and that's that influence is no longer about controlling a message. It's about shaping how your audience is going to interpret reality. As communicators, we're influencing how people shape, sense, and understand, rather than just handing off crafted messages. The most effective communicators are understand. This is the second thing. They start to understand how they're the ones that are reshaping how narratives emerge proactively. It's easy to be very reactive in the information and warfare environment because it changes so quickly. But the real challenge is to be effectively adaptive. We really need to be proactive. And then the last thing is adapting in this type of environment. It's not just about speed. It's about understanding the environment for what it really is, understanding the participants as best as I can, and doing that better than anyone else, specifically my competitors. To navigate that, more than ever, strategic positioning really has to become a part of communication, where we're proactively doing it, not merely responding to crises. Orientation is the key component of this. And orientation, think of it as this is our cognitive software. This is our own individual cognitive software. This is the cognitive software of the actors and participants inside of a media environment that we're either communicating to or communicating with. And we have to understand that everybody's orientation is completely different, and also too that it's fractal. So I have my own orientation that's based off of my experience of what I think and what I believe and where I'm from, and the fact that I'm a Marine, and the fact that I played lacrosse, and the fact that I grew up an Army brat, and the fact that I was stationed in Asia, and all these things. I can look at the same set of facts differently than somebody that didn't have that previous experience, because their cognitive software, as they make sense, which shapes how they interpret information, is going to be extremely different from mine. And we have to be aware of that as communicators, that our orientation is going to shape how we see, and it's going to shape how we form decisions, how we form actions, and how we form learning, how we learn in order to adapt. So perception too, it can't be dictated. I can't dictate facts alone to shape orientation, because everybody's understanding, everybody's orientation oftentimes is going to be subjective, and their perception becomes their reality. But at the highest level, we want to really drill down on what is our orientation. It's the mental framework, it's the cognitive software of how we process information, how we frame messaging, and how we anticipate audience reactions. We could look at several brands in the last, 10, 15 years that successfully or unsuccessfully have seized opportunities within an environment. Easy one may be the Nike's decision when Colin Kaepernick, when they featured him in an ad campaign with his protest of the national anthem. Well, it wasn't just about messaging, right or wrong. Nike was trying to control and influence rather, how the public was interpreting the event. So it's not just about selling shoes, and Mike brought up the Apple Think Different campaign. It's about creating perception. It's about enforcing perception. It's also a double-edged sword, because we can think of examples where it worked really well, and we can think of examples where it didn't work really well. But the idea is that the people there that were creating the messaging, they're trying to influence the perception of what people think. And that really is what's separating the proactive communicators versus the reactive ones. Tempo is a big thing of this. Now, it's important to understand the difference between tempo and speed. If you look at the picture here, this is exactly what you want your competitors to be doing, not you. So speed matters, but it only matters if we're the ones controlling the tempo, if we're the only ones setting the pace. The fastest communicators don't always win. It's the best adapted ones. So if we're dealing with reality as it actually is, as we understand it, and we're effective in the tempo of that, the timing of that, and we can navigate, we can set that pace such that our consumers understand, or our investors understand, or our employees understand, we're gonna be able to have more control over the narrative. We're gonna have more control over the situation than if we didn't. Now, sometimes you see things, they just go really fast, but it was the complete wrong thing to do because the fast response was completely disconnected from reality. Well, that's going to misshape perception, and if that misshapes perception, you can have a lot of fallout out of that, and that mismatch is going to create a lot of confusion, and that's going to create a lot of maybe some confusion or disloyalty amongst your competitors. Or, I'm sorry, not your competitors, your consumers, which in turn creates vulnerabilities that your competitors are going to strike at. A very fluid live example of this is Southwest. You know, Southwest has built a tribe by doing things differently than every other airline for decades. And it came out recently that they're going to be charging for bags now, whereas they had been free. And they're going to get away with do away rather with their sort of quirky no assigned seating process, which people either love or hate. When I had little kids, I loved it. And even now, I guess I'm so used to it. But I was part of the Southwest tribe. So what they're doing now is creating a lot of confusion for me. It's a mismatch. Now, in the professional work that I do, I start to create scenarios. Okay, and I'm still looking to see how they're dealing with this, but I'm starting to see competitors of theirs already seize on these mismatches to go out and try to seize the tempo and seize the narrative before Southwest actually Southwest actually does. Their timing is going to be critical. Now, remember, not their timing to just not only do it fast, but to do it oriented in a way, and say in this case, that effectively influences the perception of the Southwest tribe and try to get that to move away from Southwest to another airline, because they might position Southwest as now they're just another airline. So that might be a thought. You don't just you have to get this right. You can influence perception, you can't dictate it. So the influence combined with the timing, what you're trying to do is create mismatches for your competitors and overcome them yourself, not have to be subject to them, so that the image that you see there is not experienced by you. Narrative warfare and framing, you know, in communications, in the information battle space, framing is everything. The first to define an issue or a controversy or a crisis is often going to dictate how the audience will interpret it. Now, with the caveat of what I just said, it's not just speed. You know, getting there first is one thing, but getting there first with the right messaging, getting there first with the right type of influence, getting there first with influence that's matched to reality, that's going to be the differentiator, not the raw speed. When you're within narrative warfare, there's a couple things that jump out to me. One is the preemptive framing, right? You can define issues before anyone else can. So what Nike was trying to do with the Colin Kaepernick thing was to define the issue before anybody else did, run with that, and try to shape the perception that way. Another thing is maintaining your flexibility within the strategic ambiguity. You know, strategic ambiguity is another thing that we have to seize and take advantage of. Mike mentioned it a little bit. If we talked about the term VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, ambiguity is a massive advantage if you know how to act within it, if you're flexible enough to shift your orientation to act within it. And then the last thing is compounding effects. That small little shifts oftentimes can accumulate into the dominant perception, especially since, as you see in the image, everybody is now a participant, whether they're your consumers or not, whether they're your investors or not, whether they're your audiences or not. Anybody can access message boards, social media, Instagram, that sort of thing. Back to the Southwest example. Start to look at Instagrams of travel bloggers and Instagrams of people that have been part of the tribe historically. That's kind of where I'm expecting to see some fundamental shifts. That, you know, if I was in the boardroom at Southwest and I'm thinking, hey, strategically, this all makes sense on paper. The reality of the war might prove otherwise when I don't realize what I'm actually up against. It's not just about saving money or communicating a message from the top down. It's how it's perceived in the battle space. So that's going to be really interesting to see how that one unfolds. All right. Um, and I think that the big thing here with framing, we want to frame things because we want to own it. We don't want to chase it. We don't want to react. We want to take the lead on things. We want to take the initiative. We want to define it on our terms. We want to fight within the information warfare, the information battle space on our terms, not the terms of competitors, not the terms of any other any types of disruptors. It brings us to the next thing is that to win in that environment, you can't just respond to crises. You have to create the environment in which the narrative unfolds. We're not going to have time to go into it today, but if you go on our Substack, we do quite a bit of work on not only John Boyd, but Marshall McLuhan. And Marshall McLuhan is famous for saying the medium is the message, which is a very misunderstood term, kind of like John Boyd is only pinned on with the OODA Loop. Marshall McLuhan gets pinned on with the medium is the message, but it's a broader definition of medium, which goes far beyond media. Media, as we know it within the information environment. What he's talking about is the environment and the technology that we're dealing with. That's what we have to create. That's what we have to influence. We can disrupt our competitors' cohesion by doing that, by creating the environment, forcing it to something that they have to react to, that we're being proactive in. We can start to identify contradictions in their messaging and amplify those, right? We can create an environment that isolates them, that creates more friction for them. Go back to that picture of everybody running around crazy, like chickens with their head cut off, in a massive reactive state. We're able to do that when we're outmaneuvering them, because our competition, when we're outmaneuvering them, they don't have an answer for what it is that we do. They can't answer. Reality, as they understand it, starts to fall apart, and within that, they start to unravel. Now, if we seize that, then we create strategic ambiguity for them while maintaining our own strategic cohesion, which is very important in the communication space, because we want to have a unified narrative that allows for a lot of flexibility that's going to reinforce things, trust, confidence, and other things that our audiences expect from us. We can then, when we're outmaneuvering our competition, we can then start to disrupt rather than react. We would want to disrupt and create friction for our competitors, for our opponents. We want to do everything that we can to mitigate friction within our own ranks as we project outwards into our environment. The last thing is back to orientation, is to take perceived crises rather and turn them into opportunities to help us advance our position. As I understand that Nike did actually really well with the Colin Kaepernick scenario, reframing this. A great example of this is say Netflix. Netflix has constantly evolved since they defeated Blockbuster years ago, constantly outmaneuvered themselves even to evolve and adapt and reframe. And if we look at Netflix today, it's not anywhere resembling the Netflix that defeated Blockbuster many years ago, because as part of its culture, as part of its orientation collectively, they have a much differentiated view that they challenge assumptions. They constantly reinvent themselves to keep competitors on their toes. And other than Prime and Netflix, I really don't use any of the other things, because they stay fresh in mind by that sort of evolution. Just personal side there. Why do brands fail? A lot of reasons. If we go from left to right on this, I created all these images with Midjourney, but this is how I see why brands fail historically and why they fail in crises today. Because a lot of the messaging, a lot of what it was that we're saying, a lot of the narratives were crafted in closed rooms, behind closed doors, with old thinking. And then in the middle there, what ends up not getting addressed is the elephant in the room, that maybe because its technology has changed, or maybe social norms have changed, or maybe there's something else that's being ignored because it doesn't necessarily jive with the way we've done things, or maybe we're afraid of the backlash, or maybe we're risk averse. But the third image there is once that cat gets out of the bag, it doesn't go back in. And once that unraveling, once that sequence of failure starts, it often doesn't stop. So one of my favorite examples is Kodak. Kodak ironically discovered digital photography, and digital photography was actually what killed them. Why? Well, we have a bunch of board members and people that had made their fortunes in film. So I've got my stock options, my house in the Hamptons, and everything else that's going to make me really risk averse, that's going to make me comfortable, that's going to make me complacent, and it's going to make me to not pay attention to something that could change and redefine the industry. We know the rest of the story. Kodak went from a Dow Jones Industrial Average company to something that I can't think of the last time that I either bought film or had film developed with a film camera, but I can certainly think of the many pictures just today I've taken with digital photography. And the killer irony is that not only did Kodak discover it, but there was a decision point where they couldn't reframe, they couldn't challenge their assumptions, they couldn't adapt to what ultimately ended up doing them in. The last thing is that back to orientation and really understanding that our orientation shapes. The fancy word for that is implicit guidance and control. Our orientation, our cognitive software, our understanding of the world, our perception, that's actually what implicitly guides and controls how we see things. I live in Manhattan. I love it. It's New York City is the birthplace of my parents. It's a joy to be here, to experience and breathe it in all day long. People from Columbus, Ohio, or Indianapolis, or something like that might not like Manhattan, and they might have their own reasons. But the reality is, all of us can be in Manhattan, and we're all going to have different interpretations because our orientation, our cognitive software, our previous experience, our genetic heritage, all of that is going to shape how we see and encounter the same sets of facts. Elite communicators aren't just collecting more data; they're working on it, understanding that they have to help people interpret, and they have to shape that. They have to act on it instinctively and proactively, because everything that they create from a messaging standpoint is going to shape and influence. It's going to inspire and influence those of us that we are selling to or working with, or whatever the relationship is. The better we get at orientation, in other words, the more that we can align that orientation to what's actually going on, and the more that we can challenge it, and the more that we can revise it, and the more that we can update it, the better that shaping is going to be. And you think of an easy example is the operating system inside of your smartphone. If you don't update it, if you don't revise it, what happens? It becomes obsolete. It becomes subject to threat. Our orientation as communicators is no different. Our orientation as a brand, our orientation as a company, our orientation as a culture it's no different. If it's not updated, revised, if our models aren't smashed and destroyed and recreated, it's going to lead to static thinking versus dynamic thinking. Also, too, we get out of the mindset of just being analysts, and we start to look to synthesize things, and we start to look to anticipate things, and we get better and better and better at that when we get more perspectives to create that orientation, to match it to reality, and do it before our competitors do. This is my summary page. What you see there is an illustration of OODA Loop sketch, John Boyd's continuous process of observe, orient, decide, act. This graphic alone is 40 plus years of his own research distilled into one illustration. It's an abstract illustration. It is not a flow chart or a checklist or a template. It's merely a map designed to help you understand how that orientation actually functions in reality, how it shapes your observations, how it shapes your actions, and what you have to do to learn from it, and what you have to do to continuously revise and update it so that you can remain effective, remain valid, and not become obsolete. Misunderstanding this is probably the biggest opportunity that when I work with leaders and their teams, helping them understand this is usually the biggest thing because everyone is inherently doing this. And the better that you understand it, and the better that you understand how it shapes and how it flows within reality and in complexity, the better you're going to not only be successful at what it is that you do, but also to give yourself that competitive advantage. I caveat a lot of the stuff all the time is that ignore this at your own risk, because if your competitors figure this out before you do, or if your competitors operate with a sound understanding or an improving understanding or an evolving understanding of this or a dynamic understanding of this versus a static one, you're going to be in considerable trouble. So you want to make sure that you understand this, and I can certainly help with that in a lot of different ways. But the point is that we don't just cycle through communication strategies. We exist in a continuous world of reorientation where that orientation that you see surrounded by the blue, we have to constantly update and revise that. We can only win in a modern PR environment or a communications environment if we're influencing orientations and not just reacting faster, right? You can say, or you may have heard OODA Loop just about going faster than the other person. That's not necessarily so. It's how is that matched to reality such that I can flow through that with the correct tempo that's going to differentiate me from my competitors, and that's going to allow me to stay relevant within my environment. I'll close with that. The best communicators aren't just out there delivering messages. They're not out there just writing copy. They're reshaping how those messages are received. They're inspiring and influencing the orientations of the people that they're working with, that they're working for, in their customers or client bases. And they're also influencing the orientation of their competitors, because what they ultimately want to do is they want to create enough ambiguity, friction, confusion and mismatches that cause that orientation of their competitors to disconnect from reality such that they're not able to cycle and function through the different things that you see there on OODA Loop Sketch. So I'm happy to take any questions, Mike. That's 72 hours of briefings distilled.
No,
So
that was great. Thank you both, Mark and Mike. And we have two really good questions. I'm going to throw the first one out because I think Mark can probably, or Mike both could address this very quickly. So the first one is, to what do you apply the OODA Loop framework? To the entire organization or specific strategies or initiatives? So when can you apply the OODA Loop sketch? So that's one, and I think you're going to answer that quickly. And then the other one is, and this is a really great question. How do you shape reality, influence an audience with several different types of groups or different orientations? So you may have a situation where your investors have one orientation, your employees have another orientation, and your customers may have another orientation. How do you communicate in an environment where they might even have different or competing orientations? So one, where do you apply the OODA Loop? Then it's for both of you. And two, what do you do when your publics have different orientations and even potentially conflicting orientations? So if you guys want to just take that real quick,
yeah,
but those are good questions.
yeah. So the simple answer to the first one is that whoever asked to apply the OODA Loop, they use the OODA Loop to ask that question. The OODA Loop, and this is where I have spent years working on this particular thing, and I've even written 2 academic papers on it. OODA Loop, don't think of it as a process. Think of your cognition, your orientation is constantly cycling through a process of making observations, formulating decisions, testing those decisions, and learning. That's axiomatic. All humans are doing it all the time. It never stops. I'm OODA looping right now. You're OODA looping right now as you're listening. And what's happening as you're listening, your orientation is getting reshaped voluntarily or involuntarily. The biggest trap that people fall into, and this is where a lot of the common understandings of the work of John Boyd leads actually people to ruin versus thriving, because they think of this as a formulated templated process that I can apply in certain situations, but I'm not going to use it here. Well, the reality is that all human action is going through this cycle, through these processes continuously. Misunderstanding that is the fatal flaw. So when Boyd went back and looked at warfare from the very beginning to modern history. He lived from 1927 to 1997. Those patterns never went away. That cycling through that orientation, that concept of orientation never stopped. Humans were always doing that. Humans always will be doing that. So I always tell people, if you're thinking about this, what I'm talking about is something you can use in certain situations, you're already going to be behind the learning curve, because someone that understands that this is axiomatic and happening all the time is going to get you every single time. To your second question about what do we do with different orientations? Well, we should start with that assumption that everyone's orientation is different, where I can influence and inspire, which was Boyd's definition of leadership, was the ability to influence and inspire individuals to do things. Where I can influence and inspire, I might be able to intersect orientations to create a team, or to create a Marine Corps, or to create SEG Advertising, to create Rutgers University. All of our differentiated orientations are different, but we align or harmonize under a certain part that we agree to connect together, whether it's our virtues, whether it's our values, whether it's our vision, whatever it is. That's how we can create orientation fractally beyond just an individual orientation. That's kind of a long academic answer to that, but I hope that hits the point.
And then real quick, Mike, what do you do if your audiences are in competition? So again, they may have different orientations. How do you even deal with that? How do you manage that mismatch, which may occur naturally? So that's another question, if you could take that, Mike.
Okay, and it sort of is related to a question that you've got up there. First and foremost, you've got to thoroughly understand your each of your respective stakeholder groups. So you have to deep dive on an understanding, which then leads you to identify a couple things. One is appropriate messaging to answer that one question on the screen. But more importantly, and Mark had talked about this too, is that then you get literally in the head of your competitor. And what you're looking for communicating, if I'm understanding this question right, is you're looking for what you're specifically, not how good your competitor is, that comes out of this, but what you're specifically looking for or what they are not doing. That is the target. You're digging up their soft spots or digging up their non-spots. And so that is why you do a lot of this research. Again, it's not otherwise. It's let's just sit here and admire each other. But in this way, you find to use a military analogy, you find a weak spot, an opening, and you take advantage of it. But you do that only through a very good understanding of them. And that means that the messaging, you're talking in their same language. It's interesting. They ask, how do you do it within a very large community? Quite candidly, you probably will find it's broken down to some certain subset. So it's a fairly manageable thing, but you've got to have a very disciplined process to do it.
Just real quick, there was a question about adaptation for nonprofits. And this can be, adaptive for all environments. As Mark said, every individual and every organization is making decisions. They're sensing, they're orienting, et cetera, et cetera. So this could be applied for every environment. So certainly, and then
can I add, Mike, to that?
Yeah.
Last August, you and I co-presented to PRSA's Association and Nonprofit Group this exact concept. So
yes. So absolutely, it could be all environments. Julie, if you could, we'll do a quick winner, but then it was all after that, just to make sure we don't get cut off. After that, there was one other question. So Julie, do you want to pick the winner, and then we'll go back to the questions, and if we get cut off, at least we got the winner. So let's do that. I'm reorienting, by the way.
Sounds like a plan. So we're going to just spin the wheel, and one of our participants is going to get to have a free class here at CPS.
There was one question, I guess, within the military information operations activity, there's a new cognitive process: sense, understand, decide, act, assess. Do Mark or Mike, are you guys familiar with that? And what are your thoughts about kind of a new variation on that? I think I know your answer, but what do you think?
Well, I'll start. I mean, ever since, and this is respectful to the person that asked it. I don't know who it was, and I'm not familiar with that. I'm not familiar with that term. I'll have to look more into that. I just actually answered about another version of this where people constantly try, and I say people, within the military establishment, there are a lot of Boyd opponents that are trying to constantly build on the OODA loop or update it or whatever. And we're certainly not opposed to that as academics to try to develop it, but as practical application, what ends up happening is that we're ignoring the axiomatic part of it, right? We're ignoring that all humans have an orientation. They all observe. They all decide. They all act. What ends up happening is this most recent one that I had encountered, and this was something within the Marine Corps that I had been asked to comment on. I mean, it ends up negating a lot of things and giving into some sort of bureaucratic rigidity. At some point, it stopped people from thinking. Sense, understand, decide, and act. I mean, it's essentially just saying, as I read that, without having read the white paper on it or the article, whoever had written it, just looking at the terms, it's not unlike anything that you're going to do already through OODA Loop. It is important to note that when Boyd came up with OODA Loop originally, it was ODA, it was Orient Decide Act, and it came from sensors that he was operating within the Vietnam War when he was commanding a base there in Thailand for special operations. Then it became SODA Loop, which was Sense, Orient, Decide, and Act. And his own thinking evolved on this too. And I think that that's something that's really lost inside of the military establishment. When patterns of conflict came out, and by the way, there were 39 plus iterations. I've held most of them in my hand in the Quantico archives on several trips down there. His own thinking on OODA Loop evolved. Originally, when he starts talking about it in the late 70s, early 80s, it does sound as if he's saying, hey, I just cycle through this. Napoleon's got to cycle through this faster than the Austrians. He's going to win. Or, Alexander the Great's got to cycle through this faster than Darius at the Battle of Gaugamela, and he's going to win. But his own thinking evolved. So if you look in the context of Boyd, beyond OODA Loop and beyond patterns of conflict, we start to read organic design for command and control. We start to read conceptual spiral, the essence of winning and losing, the strategic game of interaction and isolation. Fundamentally, we don't even read his core thesis, which was called destruction and creation. I find that most practitioners don't even read that. And if you haven't read that, honestly, the rest of John Boyd, it doesn't matter what you say at that point, because you're going to be disconnected from his intellectual anchor that drove him all the way from the time that he started doing this research, late 60s, early 70s, to the time of up until his deathbed. He was still working on this in 1997. But, I'll look at Sense, Understand, Decide, and Act. If whoever sent that would like to send me a note, and if there's something specifically that they're talking about, I'll take a look. But as I look at that, it's not anything different. We haven't yet found the replacement for OODA, and I know that within the military establishment, because Boyd was a pariah to the defense establishment. He's still with the defense industrial complex. He's still sort of a bad name, if you will. And there's a lot of effort to negate his work and his theories. Because that's why I'm here, to do the opposite.
Yeah. And by the way, I'll just turn over to Mike for his reply, and we'll end it after this. But also, I think, and Mark, you've made this point several times. Even OODA Loop is not linear. I mean, it doesn't have to even be within that OODA. So you could be, observe, orient, and maybe even act. I mean, so just adding more words doesn't seem to change the fact it's still a process. So to your point, it doesn't seem much different. But Mike, you want to just have any thoughts before we close it up?
Sure, very briefly. I've always been fascinated with the alphabet soups that we come up with. And I, again, echoing Mark's very valid points on this, I would just suggest to anybody out there that whatever you're dealing with, it is about a process. And the process, from my perspective, and the biggest issue I have with dealing with clients, dealing with folks in and out of the public sector, is that it's not that they don't understand the process, or it's not very elegant on a PowerPoint. It's that it's never practiced. And so that means taking Mark's words and get out there and actually exercise them, so we can work to those efficient teams that we talked about earlier in the presentation. And so again, the challenge is in the execution, to me, on all these. So that's
I think red teaming, gamification, and that's one thing the military does really well, and I think that's one thing those of us who've never served but in the private sector could, I think, learn from is how do we gamify it and
We,
put it and test it and red team it and do all these things to put, to build up those reps and those muscles. I think we have to do a better job of that. So
absolutely. We definitely do.
yeah, but you guys, everybody was great. Congratulations to our winner. Everyone will be getting more information from Rutgers and you can certainly follow up with any additional questions. Mark, Mike, any other closing thoughts?
I was just going to answer Paul's question. I sent him a note there. The entire organization, so really anywhere humans are present, and remember OODA scales fractally from individual, duos, and everything above and everything in between. The one other thing I'd add about nonprofits, one of my greatest OODA Loop courses, and I say OODA Loop, but one of my greatest courses on this stuff was just for nonprofit executives in Columbus, Ohio, at Denison University. And it's completely applicable. Some of my best students, and Mike, some of them, have never been in the military at all, not spent 1 minute in it. So this is a human phenomena everywhere.
And by the way, Mark, real quick before we go, just your because it's such a great resource, your podcast and your blog, just so people can find it.
Yeah, so I'm at the Substack is called the Whirl of Reorientation, WHIRL. It's thewhirl.substack.com. You can subscribe for free. You can pay if you want. We put some things behind paid paywalls that we're a consulting firm, so we're an adaptive strategy firm. There's 4 of us. They're all veterans. 2 of us are the hosts of the podcast. So Brian Rivera and I are the authors at the Whirl of Reorientation. And then our podcast is No Way Out, the No Way Out podcast. And through the Whirl of thewhirl.substack.com, you can access all of our content, and also the podcast is available there as well.
Yeah. And real quick before we end, tell them why No Way Out.
Yeah, No Way Out and the Whirl of Reorientation are from the same paragraph of John Boyd's probably most important brief, Conceptual Spiral. And in this paragraph, he's basically saying, because of all the things in the world like entropy and imprecision, chaos, volatility, etc., there's no way out of the continuous whirl of reorientation. In other words, there's no way out. If you want to thrive, if you want to survive on your own terms, and you want to thrive, there's no way out of constantly revising and updating your models, because the world that you live in is dynamic. You can't eradicate that dynamicism. You can't eradicate volatility, uncertainty. You can't make those things go away. So you have to continue the whirl of reorientation, and there's no way out of that unless you want to get destroyed, become obsolete.
Yeah, and eaten by the saber-toothed tiger. So
that's right.
So okay, folks, thank you all. Great session. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.